Hi students, welcome to this tutorial on multi-track recording. Multi-track recording has been around for a long time, really, but recording in general started off in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and at that time they would have setups where they would use essentially a kind of Victrola technology that they had at the time. So they would have sitting out in front of an orchestra a large horn like this. I'm not the best artist, as you can see. So this horn would be sitting out in front of the orchestra, and it would have a little diaphragm down here and connected to a needle, and that needle would etch into a round wax cylinder. So round wax cylinder spinning like this, and the needle rubbing against it and etching the sound as it came through this big cone. Now, the orchestra in this case, we'll just pretend we're recording an orchestra. We'll say that they're out here, and this is the orchestra. If the orchestra was there, and we happen to also have a vocalist who was standing here, and we made this recording and went back and listened to it and decided that, you know, the vocalist isn't loud enough. We need to somehow alter this so that the vocalist can be louder. Is there any way that we could have done that? And the answer is there was no way we could go back and change the recording because it was on one track, or everything was recorded onto one, in this case, wax cylinder. We didn't have individual access to the individual instruments. So there's nothing that we could do to change the volume of a particular instrument, or in this case, the vocalist. So back then what they would have to do is, if the vocalist was too soft, they would have to say, let's get that vocalist to step closer to the microphone. We'll have them step out here. So the proximity to this recording device essentially makes them louder than the orchestra. Likewise, if they were too loud, we would have to have them move back away in proximity from this capturing device, in this case the recorder. And they used this method for a number of years. In the early part of the 1900s, they came up with a different medium that they started using instead of wax cylinders and other types of devices like that that were a one-time capture. Now this piece of magnetic tape may be 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch in thickness, and it ran linearly and it was spun on reels, right? So, but these were still a mono recording, so they couldn't really change anything about the recording, just like the Victrola days. All they had was proximity, so they could record a vocalist closer if they wanted him louder, or a vocalist further away if they wanted him to blend in more or be softer based on the orchestration. One of the positive things that came out with as a result of this magnetic tape was that it was re-recordable. Okay, once it was created, like the wax cylinders, once they were created, if we didn't like the recording, you just toss it and make a new one. With the tape, you could actually re-record over it. In roughly the 20s or 30s, they came up with an additional concept, which was called stereo recording. Now, stereo recording was different in that now they had 2 tracks to work with. So not just one track, they had 2 tracks to work with. So stereo recordings were essentially the first multi-track recordings. Now, when you think about 2 separate recordings or 2 separate tracks, what that essentially means for us in a more modern term is that we have the accessibility to assign a track to a speaker. So all the DVDs or CDs or MP3s that you listen to now are all 2-track recordings. One part of the recording for the left side or the left speaker, and one part for the right side or the right speaker. So in this case, this would be the left speaker and this would be the right speaker. Now, using this configuration, we basically have 2 different ways that we could record. We could come down and we could record a stereo recording. Let's say in this instance, we're going to record our orchestra again, okay? So we have our orchestra out here, and we have our vocalist out front again. Now, stereo recording, so one microphone pointing this way, one microphone pointing that way. Now, in this type of recording, you're going to get a nice wide image because you're going to get some sound from over here on the left that goes to the left speaker and some sound that goes to the right speaker over here. Let me ask you this question. If this is the case, and we have this same scenario here with the orchestra back here and the vocalist out front, again, if we decide, hey, the orchestra is too loud and the vocalist is too soft, is there anything we could do about it? And the answer is, recording this way, no, because the orchestra and the vocals are split between the left and the right side. We don't really have any control over the vocals and the orchestra. We do have a nice wide sounding recording, but essentially what we have is the orchestra on both tracks and the vocalist on both tracks. So that is one scenario, one way that we could do stereo recordings. Okay, now a second way that we could do this, if we had a stereo recording, again, we'll record our orchestra and we could have our vocalist here singing. Now, the next thing that we could do, instead of recording them out front, is we could make sure that the orchestra only appeared on one track and the vocalist only appeared on one track. Now, how would we do that? Well, we do that by making sure that we had one microphone only just for the vocalist and one microphone only just for the orchestra. So if we did that, if the vocalist is on his own recording and he's on his own track, then we could turn the vocalist up or down without affecting the orchestra. This type of stereo recording was the first multi-track recordings. In the 30s and 40s, they continued their advancement on working with multi-track recordings, and they did this by coming up with 3- and 4-channel recorders. Okay, so now we have a 4-channel tape machine. So using this same scenario, how could we utilize 4 tracks now instead of just the 2 that we did in recording the orchestra and vocalist? And what we could do in this instance is we could assign and use one of these 2 tracks to just the vocals, and then maybe want to make a stereo recording with the orchestra, so we could assign the left side of the orchestra there, and maybe the orchestra and the right side there. And then maybe there is a violin solo or something like that that we want to capture and have the ability to turn up or turn down. Okay, so now we have on these 4 tracks, we have the ability to turn the vocal up, we have a nice stereo left and right recording of the orchestra, and we have a violin solo that we can control as well. Essentially, it gives us a way to control individual elements of our recording. The more channels or tracks that we have, the better that ability. Now let's take the same scenario and let's talk about a pop configuration. What if we had a pop tune that we wanted to record? Okay, how could we utilize these tracks? One way would be to assign each individual instrument to an individual track. So maybe we have drums here, and maybe bass, guitars, and vocals. Okay, so this gives us the same kind of freedom and flexibility in our recording that we demonstrated using the orchestral template that we had earlier. One of the interesting things that started happening once they had these 3- and 4-track machines is that bands, individuals, producers started becoming more innovative in how they use these 4-track machines. Okay, that's it for this video. Our next video will continue our discussion talking about these early 3 and 4 track multi-track tape machines.